Welcome to Rare Connection, the podcast dedicated to connecting rare disease patients with others facing similar conditions, educating medical professionals and the general public, and seeking and finding clinical trials for the 95% of the FDA, of those rare conditions without any FDA-approved treatment. Hopefully, is the goal there. Today, I'm thrilled to welcome Daniel DeFabio, the Director of Community Engagement and Global Genes. At age 11, at the age of 12 months, Daniel's first child, Lucas, was diagnosed with a rare disease, Menkes syndrome. This life-changing event led Daniel to tell Lucas's story through a short documentary, which eventually inspired him to co-found the Disorder, the Rare Disease Film Festival, and later the Disorder Channel. Both of these initiatives are dedicated to spreading awareness and for patients and families facing any of the more than 7,000 rare diseases. One of Daniel's stories about Lucas won the 2015 Rare Disease Patient Story Award from Global Genes. His award-winning 12-minute documentary on Menkes syndrome is narrated by Oscar nominee Mary McDonnell. In 2008, he founded the, correct me if I'm wrong on this one, Palestine Spa Film Festival, and had created a wide range of content for American cinematographer. PBS, Wright Rice, and biotech companies, hospitals, major movie film studios, TNT's The Closer, and HBO's Curb Your Enthusiasm, among others. Currently, Daniel works for Global Gene. Currently, Daniel works as Global Gene's Director of Community Engagement, continuing his mission to support the rare disease community. Join us as we dive into his inspiring journey and learn more about his impact on his impactful work. Personally, can you share about your personal journey with Lucas and Menkes syndrome?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you. Lucas was our first child, so we didn't know what we were doing as parents. But even so, there were signs that something was possibly amiss. He was missing some milestones, and eventually, around 9 months, he actually regressed a little bit, and some people said, you need to pursue genetic testing. Within 3 months, the geneticist, actually on the first visit, he said, we're going to look into copper. And I quickly Googled, as everyone does, and found out there's really only 2 diseases that operate with copper. One is Wilson's disease, where you have too much copper, and the other is Menkes disease, where you have not enough copper. And so I know now that so many people face very long diagnostic journeys, and ours was, I suppose, mercifully short. You never want to get the bad news of a rare disease diagnosis, but I guess if you're going to get one, you'd rather get it quickly. So within 3 months, but that put us at about his first birthday, about Christmas time, we got the diagnosis of Menkes disease for Lucas, and it came with a prognosis that was grim. The boys, it's almost always boys, tend to live 3 to 10 years. And we were told things like he would never walk, he would never talk, he couldn't sit without assistance or eat without assistance. So it was a world-changing event, and all of a sudden we were in a grief. We didn't know it immediately at the time, but we were in a sort of a grief cycle of ambiguous or anticipatory grief, but then also we were thrust into this side of the medical system that really isn't built for the medically complex or the people with chronic or rare diseases. So we had a lot of learning to do, and it took a while, but we had to sort of adjust some expectations and realize that quality of life for Lucas, was paramount to us, not necessarily extending his life or fighting against the odds that way. And the good news is, what the diagnosis doesn't tell you is that there'll still be joy in your life. And this boy was just a beaming, shining, if you ever see his smile in his eyes, they light up a room. So we were able to draw a lot of comfort from him, as well as knowing we had to weather some tough times too.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. How did Lucas's diagnosis impact your family, and what were some of the biggest challenges you faced?
Yeah, it changed absolutely everything as we approached life differently. I think some of the changes boil down to these little phrases we hear so often, like live for the moment. But when you're told you have less time, you can focus your efforts a little bit more on making the best of the time you have. I'm not saying we did it perfectly, but we certainly adopted that mindset. We had to change our expectations. Suddenly you're in a world where these things we take for granted, but then how fragile they are. Maybe you can't just expect, oh, my child will go to school, my child will go to the prom or play baseball or, be in the school talent show, and all those things that as you're a new parent, you're sort of, whether you know it or not, you're looking forward to. And then the doctors, the prognosis starts to tell you these things may not be in your future. They're unlikely to be in your future. So it was a lot of adjusting our expectations. And as I said, somewhat, even though Lucas couldn't communicate with words, we were able to take some cues from him. What simple things made him happy. And then that was actually sort of like a life lesson for us, that if simple things were making him happy, could we try to be satisfied or happier in those simple moments too, of just cuddling him or playing with him or giving him the chance to break out in smiles. And so, yeah, it was a big mindset change, and there's all sorts of aspects of that where, we had to learn how to manage a medical team. And people in typical health can just rely on the doctor. Maybe some cases they might need a second opinion. But in the rare disease space, you discover you need 6, 7, 8 specialists on your team, and you might need 3rd, 4th, and 15th opinions. And then you're up against, often, no matter how many opinions you get, the answer might be, we don't know, or we are unlikely to ever know, or we're not going to know in time to help your child. And all those things are really hard to make your peace with.
Mm-hmm. What inspired you to create the short documentary about Lucas?
Yeah, you mentioned in your introduction of me that early on I wrote a story about Lucas, and It was just a blog post. It was on the Mighty, and the title was similar to something I was just saying a minute ago, which is how we had to adjust all our expectations for this child. And that blog story won a competition at Global Genes for Best Story. And if you look right here on my wall, all these years later, I still keep it, 9 years later. And that sort of put me on a path, because I didn't know exactly why I was telling that story. I didn't know if it was just for my own benefit, as a personal, almost diary made public, or a way to vent. But once it was public, a number of people reacted that it meant something to them, or it felt like something they needed to hear, or it resonated with their own story, even if that was for a different disease. And so that was a moment that led me to thinking there was value in this, not just for myself, but for others. And I had some experience as a filmmaker, and I thought, Menkes' population is so small. It's less than 100 people that we know of at any one time, boys that have this disease. What are the chances anyone else would ever make a documentary about Menkes' disease? So it almost felt like it had to be me. And I also wanted to change the landscape of the information that could be found. I was up against, at the time, it was only about 26 pages in medical journals written about Menkes' disease. And I don't pretend I understood them all, but I did read them all. And if you'd read them, that's all there was. And there was no good news in it. You know, of course, it's a dire situation, and it's not the business of scientific papers to tell you where the optimism lies. But I thought, I can't change the reality that this is a bad diagnosis, but I can provide the context of, yes, it's difficult and short lifespan, but also at the same time, you get to live a life with this child, and maybe you can enjoy that life too. And so that was part of the reason I included 2 other Menkes disease families in the documentary. So it wouldn't just be our story. It wouldn't just be maybe they're the fluke where they're able to somehow enjoy their life. I wanted people to see that these 2 things go hand in hand, and it's not all hardship and tragedy, even though there's plenty of that.
Yeah, I'm learning from doing these podcasts that it actually, you are not alone. It's so even more so than I thought, but because you really feel alone when you have a rare disease. It's just, the word rare is, but it's not all it's cracked up to be. I mean, people think, oh, you know, rare is just a few, and really there's over, as I said, 7,000 rare conditions, but in some places that's been, depending on where you look at, it's up to 10.
Right. Global Genes and RareX and several other leaders in the space have sort of reassessed that 7,000 number and feel like it is now closer to 10,000 rare diseases.
Right. So how do you go about producing? How did you go about producing the documentary, and what was the process like?
I first had to reach out to the other. I thought the easiest part would be shooting my own family story, because I live with them and they're conveniently located. But first I had to reach out to the other families, make sure they were available, and schedule them. And one was not far from me, about an hour south, so that was easy. The other was a real stroke of luck. She was based in Australia, and I was not going to get to Australia. However, a filmmaker friend of mine that I'd worked with was going, and he was bringing his film equipment. I said, any chance, while you're there, you could interview a friend of mine? And he did it, and I'm forever grateful to Mike for that, because it made our scope and our approach kind of literally worldwide in trying to show that this story is a little bit more universal than just the 2 upstate New York families. And, as a practical matter, that when I said I thought my family would be the easier part, logistically it should have been, but emotionally I found out it was not. I kept postponing, and I was finding it difficult to do my own interview or my wife's interview. And eventually, you feel like the deadline is there and you just have to get through it. But it was tough. And also in editing, it was tough. The woman that you see in the film from Australia has a line where she says, "On a bad day, we're rushing to the hospital." And as you edit, often you'll play the same line over and over again. So that was echoing in my ears over and over again on this one particular day. And I got the phone call the first time ever. My son Lucas's school called and said, "You need to get here. We're putting him in an ambulance." And it just felt like a creepy omen that those words had been in my ears from Tamara from Australia, from her experience, was now becoming my experience. And then, of course, short one, so that derailed our lives for a while we dealt with the acute health crisis, eventually getting through it. But then, again, psychologically for me, the last thing I wanted to do was pick up that film again at that point. So I found a lot of reasons to delay making it, but eventually we finished it.
Mm-hmm. What kind of impact has the documentary had on the rare disease community and beyond?
Initially it was kind of hard to tell. You can look at how many people view it online and count those numbers and start to feel maybe like you're making an impact that way. And for a while, at one point, we got up to 12,000 views, and I thought, oh, this is fantastic. And then I dug into those statistics a little bit more and saw that a lot of people stopped watching after 2 minutes. It's only a 12-minute film. So then I was scratching my head, was it boring after 2 minutes? Did they lose interest? Did I make my point in the first 2 minutes? So that actually led me to cut a shorter version, a 5-minute version, just in case for short attention spans, or sometimes screening at different events. They'll want the shorter one, not the longer one. But since then, I've found examples where I could tell it had an impact. Often I will be invited to a conference or an event to speak, and that's mostly, I think, because they found me through the film, or they wanted to screen the film and then hear me speak about it. So it certainly opened some doors. I think a lot more people are aware of Menkes disease. Oftentimes, I've heard back from someone that they knew about Menkes disease from my son or from this film. So that feels satisfying.
Yeah. Let's see. So, can you tell us more about the founding of the mission of the mission of Disorder, the Rare Disease Film Festival?
Yeah. So the first that same year I won the Global Genes Award, I was encouraged to go to their event, the Global Genes Patient Advocacy Summit, which happens usually every September. And when I was there, I met another rare disease dad, Bo Bigelow. His daughter Tess has USP7, or Howe Fountain syndrome. And we got to talking. He was thinking he might make a film about his daughter, and I had just done my film. And then we started to talk about, what do you do with those films when you're done? Well, you can send them to film festivals, and you can try to do conferences and events, as I just mentioned. But after a while, you might exhaust the possibilities, and maybe none of those are the perfect audience. So Bo and I were thinking, well, what is the perfect audience? Maybe it's something like a medical conference, because that audience cares about healthcare issues. But maybe it's also a bit like a film festival audience, because it's more of a general, you want the world to know about these things, not just the people who already care. So we began to think, how do we combine the two? And that's really where we came up with, why isn't there a film festival like this, dedicated to rare disease stories? And then the light bulb went off. So many things in rare disease, you discover what you wish was there isn't, and maybe it should be you that creates it. So that's what we did. And the first one was in Boston in 2017. And then we did a second one in San Francisco in 2019. And by the time we got to almost ready to do our 2020, there was a pandemic. And gathering vulnerable people with rare diseases into a movie theater during a pandemic was about the worst idea you could imagine. So we didn't do it. And instead, we thought, is there something like a virtual option that would work? And that led us to, rather than do a virtual film festival, could we build a whole TV channel around rare disease stories? And that's how the Disorder Channel came to be in 2020. And now that channel, it's free. If you have a Fire TV device, you can add it the way you would add Hulu or HBO or Netflix. We have over 250 films and videos. Most of them are documentaries, but some are like TV talk shows, like Once Upon a Gene TV, or Hatching for Health is another talk show. And we even have a couple of things that are comedies or animation on there. So we try to have a little bit of variety mixed in with all the more what you'd expect are the documentaries. But even if it's a fictional film, we try to make sure it has the disease information portrayed accurately.
Definitely. What motivated you to start the Disorder Channel, and what kind of content what kind of content can viewers expect to find there?
Yeah, our films typically deal with one disease each. Often it's the family, as in my own case or Beau's case, it's the family telling their own personal story about this one disease. But other times it might be a patient advocacy organization that has done the film to represent several people's stories within, let's say, mitochondrial disease. And then again, there are some, we've made some ourselves, that take 8 or 10 different diseases and try to show what do these people have in common. It's not the specific symptoms they have in common, but it's the lifestyle that comes from facing a rare disease that they have in common. So people might go to our channel and search the disease that interests them, let's say cystic fibrosis, and then up come 2 or 3 films on cystic fibrosis. But you might also just be browsing the way you browse Netflix and say, oh, that title sounds intriguing, and let me watch that film. They tend to be pretty short, typically maybe around 10 or 15 minutes, but we have anything from 3-minute long to 99-minute long films.
How do you select the film and stories that featured on the festival for the festival's channel on the channel?
Yeah, oftentimes we'll just discover them. We'll hear about a fellow rare disease family or organization that's making a film, and we'll ask. We'll say, hey, we love what you did. Could we add it to our channel? And other times they seek us out. It's great to know now we're being discovered, and they'll say, you run this festival and you run this channel. I have a film. Would you like to see it? And, often it's a good fit for us. Really, as long as its primary goal is to educate and inform rather than, say, promote a product, we are usually open to those as long as they're rare disease stories of patient experience. We're almost always willing to take on the films that come our way.
What does your role as Director of Community Engagement for Global Genes entail?
Yeah, so it's a number of things. Initially, it started as leading a online community for people that are facing rare diseases, and it still includes that. Right now, that is in the form of a closed Facebook group. You know, if you applied to join, we only are really asking that you are directly connected, either as the patient or the caregiver, or some kind of advocate in rare disease, and then you can join this community. And we just keep conversations open there and try to provide resources to people, and not only Global Genes resources, but any useful rare disease resource. But then, of course, other aspects of my job have evolved, and one, because of my background with film, is in conjunction with the Disorder Channel and Global Genes, we've offered these workshops on teaching people how could you, using your cell phone as a camera, how could you make your own rare disease short film? And we've done that workshop for about 3 years now. And we've gotten some great films out of that. And that's actually another way sometimes Disorder Channel discovers films. Some of the films that come from that program have ended up on our channel. Others, 3 this year, most years we've shown about 3, will screen at the big event Global Genes does, which is commonly known as our summit. It's the Week in Rare, and within the Week in Rare is the Rare Advocacy Summit. So we will show 3 films that were made this year through the Rarely Told Stories project. So that's definitely a component of my job there. And the summit itself has taken up a good bit of my time as I've been involved in planning what topics we'll present and what speakers will fit those topics well. So designing a bit of the agenda and the faculty for our events.
Mm-hmm. Sounds like the films sound a lot like something they showed the Rare Disease Week with Every Life Foundation also.
Right. I know Every Life does a film every year during Rare Disease Week.
Yeah.
In fact, we just did a storytelling workshop, not specific to film, but other things like writing articles or blogs or podcasts, and Every Life was one of the presenters, and they emphasized how their art program is useful as a way to use a visual art piece as the opening of your conversation about your rare disease. So I was thrilled to have them participate in that, along with Mike Porath from The Mighty and Jennifer Seidman from Courageous Parents Network, and myself were all presenting in that workshop. And that's something you can find now on Global Genes' website as a replay if anyone wants to rewatch that and sort of be encouraged and informed on how to better tell their story.
Mm-hmm. Let's see. Can you share some of the most rewarding moments and accomplishments in your career related to your rare disease, to rare diseases?
There's really so many, and some of them are things like being nominated for a Champion of Hope at Global Genes, getting a Advocate of the Year from Mass Bio and Nord one year, but really beyond those, and some of the, as I mentioned, the speaking opportunities when people have asked me to join, that's been such an honor. But more important than any of those is all the opportunities to meet people that are walking a similar path and connect with them and realize we have this sort of shorthand of communication where we understand each other's lives. And when we lost Lucas, I was so grateful to be deeply entrenched in this community that understood that particular type of loss. And I always say, for advice to anyone that's suddenly facing this because they're newly diagnosed, step one is probably find your people. And I feel that I had done that. I had immersed myself in those people, the rare disease community. But then having lost Lucas, it was almost a new type of people that I needed to find, which was a subset of those that not only faced rare disease, but were also bereaved parents. And I was very grateful to have several of them be able to be there to support me and guide me. And now I'm a few years past that, and I hope that I'm doing that for the next people that come along too.
Mm-hmm. Can you share some of your? Okay, we just did that. Okay. How do you think storytelling and film can contribute to raising awareness and driving change in the rare disease community?
Yeah, I think any version of telling your story is a powerful first step. It will help you. It will help you frame your thoughts and understand your own thoughts, and that's great. But putting it out there publicly has all these benefits where people will find you, and they may become your next ally or maybe even your next best friend. And you never know what opportunities that will bring your way, even if it's just a sympathetic ear that you didn't have before. You'll make a lot of connections by sharing your story. Now, if you share it in film, it's my preferred way. I think it's probably the most powerful of all media because it's using written story, it's using the power of music, it's using the visual arts. All of these elements combined, you can certainly get a lot of emotional impact. In fact, there's been a criticism of my film that maybe it's unrelenting. We don't give people enough pause to think and feel and digest what they just heard. And that's a little bit the nature of it being short. You can only take so much time. But then when I made my most recent film this year, which was Life After Diagnosis Day, I made sure it was in part about grieving a diagnosis. So I made sure to put in a bit more quiet time and a bit more pauses so that people might absorb what they just heard a little better. So I think it's a great advocacy tool for those reasons, and also that it's so easily distributed. Whether you put it on YouTube or you send people a link to it, it can, once it's done, it's not easy to make a film, but once it's done, it is easier than retelling your story, especially when it's emotionally heavy for you to do so. It's easier than retelling it to every few dozen or few hundred people you meet. You can maybe give them the short version and then send them the link to the video. Or if you're an advocacy organization, you can use that video as an introduction to what this disease they've never heard of is.
So what advice would you give to other parents and advocates who want to share their stories or start similar initiatives?
Yeah, I guess first go to Global Genes, and under our navigation, there's a rare disease storytelling section on the page. It has dozens of resources on tips on how to tell your story, whether you want to do that in a vlog or podcast or video. But I do have a lot of advice for people. It tends to start with choose what part of your story you're going to tell, because we tend to start with diagnosis day and then we want to travel through time to the current day, and that may be too much story to tell. I think it's much better to pick a moment and see if that moment can represent the core of what you need to convey. Also, I think people should think about their ending first. What will you end on? Will you end on asking people to spread the word for awareness? Will you be asking for a donation? Will you be asking for people to find more patients like the one you just discussed? And once you know that sort of call to action that's going to go at the end, then you can better shape the story that motivates people to get there.
One thing I thought about, but how do you choose music that doesn't kind of disrupt the situation? Kind of fits.
Yeah, it's a good question. a less experienced filmmaker will often, if they don't create the greatest sound quality of their interviews, they may put music start to finish the whole time, and I recommend against that. I think you got to bring your music in and out selectively, not for the whole time. But choosing the right piece is tricky. Often I use stock music libraries that you can go through and you can search by sometimes mood, and then you have to figure out, well, what are the keywords that are the right mood? And sometimes in our rare disease world, it's inspiration or inspirational or hope. But then those things can sometimes sound a bit cliched, as you've heard too many of the same pieces that sound hopeful. And sure, the opposite is true too. Some moments in the film are just plain out sad and distressing and difficult, and maybe you want to emphasize that with the music. It can also be a big help if you find a more advanced music library that lets you, well, the very best is to find a composer. That if you have a friend who's a composer, or you can afford a composer, they will custom make the perfect movie music for you. But if you're left to picking from a stock library, there are times where you might find the ability to turn on and off certain instruments. So I found very useful turning off the drums can make a perhaps too upbeat piece more appropriate. And often, if you pay a lot of attention to these rare documentaries, you'll notice it can be cello. The cello is a very soulful, stirring solo instrument, and oftentimes it is the solo cello or primarily cello piece that you'll hear in these documentaries.
So, I see. How can individuals or organizations get involved in Global Genes and support your mission?
Yeah, there's so many ways. If they want to financially support, they can go to globalgenes.org, and there's a donate button, and we'd love to have that. We're coming up on our 16th birthday in a couple of weeks, so we usually don't actually ask very often for donations, but we might do that for our birthday coming up. But there's other ways to be involved too, which is to attend our events. Right now, we are open for registration for the Week in Rare in Kansas City in September. We'd love to have people come and join that event. Usually around January, we might put out a call for people that have an idea for a topic or a speaker to be at one of our events. People can participate that way. We have a link for Share Your Story, which could be a written story of about 1,000 words. People can submit that, and we'll turn it into a blog post on our website. We have a workshop in a couple of weeks for grieving, whether it's grieving a diagnosis or grieving a loss to death. So checking out our website, there's so many great ways to participate with Global Genes. You can join RareX, you can put in patient information and healthcare data, and that can be found by researchers. And so your rare or ultra rare disease, which might not have much research interest, might find its way by being in this pool of data, because let's say no one was researching your particular disease, but they were researching seizures in general, and seizures is a symptom of your disease, so therefore your data ends up in that same pool, right? So there are a great number of ways to participate with Global Genes. Another real easy one is when you email us or contact us by phone, you're getting a response from our Rare Concierge, which is a guide to answer your questions or to point you to the right resources based on what you've told us your needs are.
Mm-hmm. So what upcoming projects or initiatives are you most excited about?
Well, we are coming up in September, the biggest event we do, the Week in Rare, so that's certainly exciting, and there's so many great sessions in that people, and if they can't attend in person, they could attend virtually, so there's a lot of great information to be had and education to be had there. We have sessions on providing assistance to the caregivers to lighten the burden of caregiving, or how adults with rare disease can manage the additional considerations on their career, finding a job or getting accommodations at their workplace. We're having a panel where young kids and siblings to young kids who have rare disease will speak about that sibling dynamic, and does the sibling relationship change? Is the sibling in part a caregiver, or just the impacts that it has, and how parents can respond and sort of manage that terrain. There's a lot of your listeners will probably know what a VUS is, a variant of unknown significance, which can feel pretty disappointing when you've gone through genetic testing and that's your answer, which is almost a non-answer. It means we're not sure. We found something, but we're not sure. So we have a panel discussion on what do you do with that information, and how do you move forward with that? Can that be helpful to you, even though it's not a conclusive answer that you were hoping for? And part of our Week in Rare is also the Health Equity Forum. So we're dealing with all of rare disease as sort of essentially a minority population or an underserved population. But within that, certain underserved populations have their own unique issues to face and overcome. So whether that's by a geographic disadvantage or an economic disadvantage, or because of culture or race, we're addressing some of those issues. We've done that event for about 3 years, and we're convening some of the leaders in that space for the best practices in engaging community partners, or how can we have better diversity in clinical trials. And then some fun stuff there. We're screening a film of a woman. It's called Holding Moses, and she was a performer in the Broadway musical Stomp, and she has a special needs rare disease child, and she happens to be a queer woman, so she's facing probably some intersectional challenges there, and that's addressed in the film. And then we'll have question and answer after that film, and we're going to have a storytelling workshop there that is a bit like writing a diary entry or a poem, and then making a mask. Maybe it's a superhero mask, or maybe it's a cultural mask that reinforces your story. Suzanne Edison is great, and she's leading that workshop with us. And the event also has the Week in Rare Advocacy Summit, also has a track dedicated to leaders of patient advocacy organizations, and what topics will they benefit from learning and they can bring back to the communities they serve. And then there's another track that's all rare disease research topics. So what do you need to know if you want to be a partner in research, and how can you move research forward? So there we have topics like, can you use AI to improve diagnosis? How can you be a collaborator with research partners? Overcoming the value of death in research, which is an unfortunate term, but it's a dead end in the research sometimes. So that is the near-term thing that I'm most excited for that Global Genes is doing. It tends to be the biggest event we do each year.
Mm-hmm. What are some of your long-term goals for work in the rare disease community?
I think broadly, as long as we keep bringing people together, good will come of it. I think the trend we're seeing is good news as each individual rare disease sort of ramps up their efforts and improves in the research initiatives. All that specialization is good and necessary, but where Global Genes can be so useful is as an umbrella organization across all rare diseases. Each of those organizations, however advanced they may become, can still learn from each other, and we can convene them and connect them and help them learn from each other. So I would like to see that sort of cross-collaboration continue and improve, even as people get more specialized and advanced in their own disease states.
Mm-hmm. How do you envision the future of rare disease advocacy and awareness, and what role do you hope it will play in it?
Well, we're seeing a great shift. I think the patients and the patient advocates were not too long ago a bit of an afterthought. Only when a drug product was ready to come to market did we need to check in with the patients, and because ultimately it has to be approved for use in patients and sold to patients. But that was so downstream in the process, and now industry has, and the FDA has required it, and the process has gotten a lot more inclusive earlier. So trial design will include a patient advocate or the voices of the patients. We hear a lot now about the patient voice or being patient-centric, and that's really a great improvement. I think we can keep pushing it in that direction, and I think the various stakeholders, industry, pharma included, are seeing benefit to integrating the patient voice earlier, and they can avoid some pitfalls, something that only the person with the lived experience, expertise could have told them may or may not work. You can now have that warning months earlier or years earlier if you bring in that voice early in the process rather than late in the process. So I think that's an encouraging trend, and I'd like to see us be a part of pushing that forward a little more.
Looking back, what have been the most significant lessons you've learned from your journey with Lucas and your work in the rare disease community?
There have been so many. I mentioned things like live for the moment, or appreciate the small things, or don't sweat the small things, and then realize that almost everything is a small thing. It really does change your perspective to what's important. But also, finding the other people, being open to their expertise, and knowing that you can lean on them and learn from them. It's been, in some ways, amazing. I mean, difficult, but our family has seen some of the best of people as they reach out. No one likes to be vulnerable and in need, but when you are, some people really rise up, and sometimes you see the best of people that way. And I think especially within the rare disease community, the ones who are active they're all trying to help. So you're meeting really great people. It's the club no one would want to join by choice, but you meet the best people in it.
How has your perspective on life and parenting changed since Lucas since his diagnosis?
We really looked for the things that mattered to Lucas, and then we can apply them somewhat to our other son, who's in more typical health. But we found, for example, a lot of special needs families will do a Make-A-Wish trip and go to Disney World or go swim with the dolphins or whatever. And we realized those things weren't great for Lucas. What was great for him were much simpler things, which is to have his family close and around him. And as many of us as he could get at one time was even better. And so it's such a small thing, but the logistics of putting a wheelchair up to a table sometimes is tricky, especially Lucas was tube fed, so he wasn't actually eating the food on the table. But we discovered if we could put him in the center of the table, and it sounds silly because he was almost like a centerpiece, he was lying on the table as we all sat around him, that cracked him up and thrilled him, and he liked nothing better because all his people were close and they had their eyes on him and he could keep his eyes on us. And so little changes and changes toward the little things became a very different way to live for us. You know?
Mm-hmm. So how does your other child take it when Lucas is getting all the attention because of this?
Yeah, he certainly got his own share of the attention. In some ways, they were on two different tracks with two different types of attention. You know, the younger one would be running around the room like a crazy kid, and Lucas is going to be in one spot, whether it's his wheelchair or on the couch or on a table. And they had a great dynamic. In some ways, Lucas loved no one more than his brother and loved nothing more than attention from his brother. And yet, as little as Lucas could express himself, you could still see it. He would both be smiling in anticipation and wincing in fear as this crazy tornado of a younger brother came at him. And I really could tell what it meant was, I love that you're coming to play with me, but I'm afraid you might hurt me. You know, he'd sort of keep his guard up as much as he could. It was a really charming dynamic they had. And there was another moment where Lucas rarely sat on a couch the way most people would, unless we propped him up with a bunch of pillows or held him in our arms. And one day I did that to put him next to his brother, and boy, his face just lit up, and he did this side-eye glance at his brother that just said, see, what you're doing is what I'm doing. We're doing the same thing here. And it's just so simple, but you have to take a few extra steps to make those simple things happen, you know, when your child has different abilities.
Mm-hmm. So is there is there a message that you'd like to convey? See. Is there a message or piece of advice you'd like to share with our listeners, especially those who are navigating their own personal disease journeys?
Yeah, especially for people who are new to this, I often say, and I've heard a lot of others say, you know, you've got to go find your people. And it's that simple, but it's not that simple. So you probably think you've got a support network, your family and friends, and maybe you do, but we all have discovered the hard way that some friends step up and some friends step away. So you are actually going to need to find new people, the new people who are ready to walk this path with you, which is a difficult one. And then I would say find more of them than you think you need, not just new ones, not just different ones, but more of them, because these people become your support system, and without it, it is a lonely, difficult road. You can white knuckle it and try to do it alone, but there's no bonus points for that. I think some of us have our pride, maybe I was one of them, have our pride that make us feel like I'm going to do it all myself. I don't need to ask for help. That's the big advice I'm really getting at here, is ask for the help. And when people say to you, and they'll say, because you know, most people want to help. They say, what can I do to help? Is there anything I can do to help? And most of us have a gut reflex reaction to say, oh, I'll let you know, or nothing really right now, or whatever. And I'm here to tell you that you are squandering an opportunity when you do that. So what I would say instead is have a list of things. These are my recurring needs, my chronic needs. Here's a regular schedule of events where I need help. And if you want to do any one or two or three of them, take a look at this list. And maybe it's something you hand people, or maybe it's a blog that you send them a link to later and say, I remember you were asking how you could help. And that also takes a bit of the pressure off that I don't know how much help you want to give me. Are you willing to come mow my lawn? Are you willing to build the ramp for the wheelchair? But if all those things are on a list, somebody can pick the easy one if they want. I'll bring you pizza on Thursday. Great, thanks. Or they can pick the real heavy-duty one, like building that wheelchair ramp if they're skilled in that area and willing. So don't dismiss the offers of help. I guess that's one of my first pieces of advice.
Let's see. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Reconnection. I hope that our conversation with Daniel and DeFabio is as inspiring and informative as I did. Daniel's dedication to raising awareness and for our disease, and through storytelling and his own work in Global Genes, is truly inspiring. Remember, if you or someone you know is looking for clinical trials, you can visit clinicaltrials.gov, and you can use the search tool there to find specific the clinical trials for any clinical trials that would be for that specific territory. Before we go, I want to remind you to subscribe to Rare Connection on the podcast platform that you're listening to this on, and also Rare Chef is my YouTube channel that this is being filmed on, as well as I also have cooking videos on it. And don't forget to subscribe to when you can find any an additional content. And wait, okay, so never mind. I also encourage you to join the Rare Connection Facebook group and like the Facebook page. Updates to support for a rare disease community. I also you can contact me by commenting in the podcast below. By commenting below if you're a visual listener, or the audio version, there's a link in the show notes. You can actually text me. It goes directly to my cell phone. When you are looking, we are also looking for volunteers, board members. I'm trying to turn Recognition into a nonprofit, and having some difficulty finding people. This is a great opportunity to gain experience and help with those with rare diseases. If you're interested, please reach out to me directly. I will have my email in the show notes. Finally, if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please reach out for help. It is available. You can reach out to the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or text hello to 741-741. Remember, you are not alone. Thank you again for joining us today, and until next time, stay connected and keep advocating for the rare disease community. Thanks.